Good morning. It's very good to have you here today. If you've come along to session 4 of Live with Mike, I'm hoping that we will have a good time as we get further into the issues that relate to unwanted same-sex attraction. Well, you caught me reading a book. It's a bit embarrassing, this book, and I've been trying to figure out how I can read it if I ever get the chance to go out again and sit on a bench, as I think people in England are. So I've worked out that if you take an A4 envelope and you slice it open with a pair of scissors and cut the ends off, you can get a pretty good cover, just so that the thought police, don't come running when they see you reading a book that isn't quite what certain factions in society want us to be thinking and saying about things. But I'll come back to the book in a few minutes. I've been thinking about last week's session. We spent quite a bit of time talking about the 12-step approach to dealing with emotional issues. And my concern is to really put the 12-step approach in the context of psychodynamic work. I think most of the work that I would do would be termed as psychodynamic. It would be looking at processes, developmental stages and consequences, etc. And the 12-step approach I find really useful, but it's not a psychodynamic approach. It's just a different approach. And what I find is that several people who are doing the psychodynamic work are also doing 12-step work. They sometimes go together, and some people like to be involved in both. So I just wanted to make that distinction between the two approaches. So what are we dealing with today? Well, I guess in a nutshell, we could say it's emotional dependency. And if we work towards a definition of what that means, maybe these words can help. It's about depending on you for me. It's when we get into a position where a relationship with somebody else becomes all important, and any kind of separation from that relationship brings tremendous anxiety. Now, this may not be everybody's problem. It may not be your problem, but I guarantee there will be people out there who are struggling with this. And they may not also be struggling with same-sex attraction. They may not have lesbianism in their lives. They may not be men who are attracted to men. They're just other people who have other issues and sexual proclivities in their lives. So, in other words, this is something that anybody can experience. But I have found it to be quite common among LGBT folks. And actually, the reason why my book is covered, well, I'll come back to that. I don't quite want to get into that. But some people do say that emotional dependency is primarily something that women struggle with. Well, let's, for a minute, have a look at some of the definitions that are being offered for emotional dependency. Welcome those who've come today. Thank you so much, Mike. It's nice to see Mike and Fiona, and your interactions are always really useful. Laurie Rensel has just put it this way: emotional dependency occurs when the ongoing presence and nurturing of another is believed to be necessary for security. Emphasis: necessary for security. There's something fundamentally important here in this relationship for the person who is going towards emotional dependency. Aaron says something else. She says it's a state in which a woman feels totally reliant on another woman for safety and functioning. When a woman is emotionally dependent, she feels as though she literally cannot exist without the object of her dependency. Nice to see you, Kylie and Christian Morano. It's very good to have you. Thank you for coming. So I wonder if you can see here, she literally cannot exist without the object of her dependency. So, this is more than just a bonding in a relationship. It actually becomes critical to the point where separation becomes very important. The last one, Surrey says this, that it's a state of emotional connection where the presence of the object becomes related to a sense of well-being, security, and need gratification. Okay, so that's what we're dealing with today. And there's a couple of books that I want to bring to your attention. Okay. I'll admit it. I am reading The Heart of Female Same-Sex Attraction. Just don't tell the thought police, otherwise they'll ban the book, or you know how it's going these days with all of that. Yeah, I am slightly embarrassed to be reading this book because, to be honest, this book was very important to me some years ago in a personal way. So irrespective of any counseling work that I was doing, I recognized that there was an issue of dependency in my life. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So what I am saying, and the reason for the cover, is the fact that I disagree that emotional dependency is something that belongs only to women. It is found among men, particularly those who struggle with same-sex attraction. And I have to say that in much of my work, I have come across this issue, and thankfully, we've been able to work through it in many, many people's cases. So the book is by Janelle Hellman, and it's quite easily available. Look around, look for the best price, look for second-hand sellers of the book. I have to say that it is essentially written for counselors, but it's not so technical as to be unaccessible for people who don't particularly like to get into too much detail about things. Another little book that I think is really worthwhile. So this is just really a pamphlet. It's been available for a long time. Emotional Dependency by Laurie Rensel. And today I am going to be taking extracts from both of these books and putting them into the context of personal experience. So, actually, I'm wondering if I shouldn't start just by reading some of the things that I am finding really interesting. So just have a listen to this. This is from Janelle Hellman. Dependency is a healthy construct in relationships to the extent that each party can mutually rely on the other when one's own resources are not adequate to face a besetting need or circumstance. In healthy relationships, a woman is not consciously or unconsciously consumed with her own developmental needs, but is established and secure. She can tend and be tended to in a satisfying mutual association. Emotional dependency, on the other hand, takes on the flavor of a childhood attachment. Attachment has been defined as a state of emotional connection where the presence of the object becomes related to a sense of well-being, security, and need gratification. And while we all need a sense of secure attachment throughout our lives, surely attached adults are not chiefly driven by their primal attachment needs. Many women with same-sex attraction are not able to exert healthy adult mutuality and reliance. They remain subject to the simultaneous pressures and influences of their unresolved attachment and dependency needs and differentiation process. As one might imagine, these two forces, a need to attach and the seeming opposed need to separate and differentiate, create incredible relational confusion and chaos, not to mention deep inherent relational instability. So for me, here's the operative phase. Securely attached adults are not chiefly driven by their primal attachment needs. And so what I think Hellman is arguing is that in an emotional dependency, it's as though there is a kind of vestigial longing, something that has not been resolved, that becomes the focus of a person's attachment attempts towards another person. And so it's much more than interdependence or relying on somebody. She's making the point that we all need to rely on others. But when we become dependent, that is, our very existence and well-being depends on another person, that becomes a problem. Now, I'm not talking about a faithful marriage where a man and a woman have been together for many years. There is such a thing as codependency in that context. There is such a thing as unhealthy emotional attachment, but it's dealt with in a different way. What I'm talking about here is primarily what single people experience, or people who struggle with same-sex attraction and who are constantly trying to connect with other people, not even for a sexual encounter, but more from an emotional encounter. That's what we're dealing with here. And we're going to, first of all, look at characteristics of these relationships, and then we're going to have a go at seeing how we can get free from them. I just want to have a quick look and see who's here. Rebecca's here again. That's wonderful. Thank you for coming. Hello again, Christian. It's nice to see you, and Kylie and Matthew. Matthew, I hope, is going to help us at some point to just get the questions together. If there are any questions, pull them together, and I'll have a go at answering them. And if I can't, well, we'll just carry on in the comments over the next week. Okay, so let's progress. I'm quoting here from Hellman's work, and I'd like to just spend a little time on this list. What are the main characteristics of emotional dependency or fusion? That's probably a really good word to use when we consider emotional dependencies. It's this fusion. It's when I don't know who I am, and I think I know who the other person is, but in reality, I'm not too worried about the facts because I've made this person something that I need them to be. In other words, this relationship is on very shaky ground. So, firstly, the relationship's rapid or extremely intense formation is often based on idealization. Exactly what I've said. these relationships don't always operate on fact. A person is drawn to another person and they are seen to be something really desirable, or somebody who can really boost the person who is seeking to connect with them in terms of their own self-esteem. And probably that's a good place to start in understanding the characteristics of these relationships. It's usually characterized by at least one person who has extremely low a low sense of self-esteem and self-confidence. And what they see in the other person is a high level of self-esteem and a very good ability, social ability, often to connect to other people. I think what we're saying here is that there is a complementarity that comes together, but I would argue it's a complementarity of brokenness. I would also argue that in emotional dependent relationships, there is often somebody who is enabling this to happen. In other words, it really does take two to tango. Maybe in the early stages, the person who is being sought wises up and moves away and recognizes what's happening. But sometimes that doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen because somebody is wanting the relationship and the other person is enabling it. One may be a codependent personality and the other may be a dependent personality. The codependent wants to connect, and the counter-dependent wants to connect, but only so far. He or she has a need to be needed. That's what's motivating the cycle there. But once the seeker comes too close, then of course there's a problem, and there's conflict. Give me a second here. So just going back to the definitions, emotional dependency occurs when the ongoing presence and nurturing of another is believed to be necessary for security. Just getting my slides here. Sorry, folks. There we go, showing the stream. I'll get this right. I really will, one of these days. So number 2, what's the second characteristic of these relationships? Well, I've hinted at this already. The relationship is not about sex, it's about connection. And here's the thing. I have to say, if I had £1 for every time a man said to me, I didn't want the sex, I just wanted the connection, I would be a rich man. Because it really is that there is a primary need in this kind of world just to sense the camaraderie and to feel as though I belong in this world. And the fact that this is happening between two males, let's say, or between two females, and it's essentially the attempt to, develop a nurturing relationship that receives a lot of support, indicates that potentially it could end up as a sexual same-sex relationship, but it's often motivated just by the need for connection or friendship. But I find that interesting. In other words, there are same-sex couples who will come together and seek sexual gratification from one another who are not in emotionally dependent relationships. So I don't want to be heard to be said that every lesbian relationship and every same-sex type relationship is necessarily about emotional dependency. I'm not saying that, but my experience is that there is a very high level of this. And sometimes the need to go from one relationship to the other is related to this. So a person who gets into a same-sex relationship and then it ends, and it's a tragic end, and one or both didn't expect it to end. Very often, if there are not sufficient personal resources that a person has, it's a crushing blow to the point where that it can leave people absolutely devastated. But then you can see what happens. To resolve it, the person will pick themselves up and go in the same direction again and will connect with another person. And so it goes on. Well, let's just carry on with this. Number 3, the third characteristic, the relationship fosters enmeshment and loss of self. Ferguson, you're very welcome. Thank you for coming. And Rebecca, I'm seeing your comments. I'm going to try and get back to them and comment on them in a few minutes. So the relationship fosters enmeshment and a loss of self. And folks, this is what I want to concentrate on. Unhealthy, emotionally entangled enmeshments are about the fact that I don't have a good sense of who I am. And hence the little tagline in the front that we used, talking about depending on you for me. In other words, I don't really know who I am unless I'm with you. Because what I'm receiving from you in an enmeshed relationship is constant reassurance, or perhaps, a certain kind of counseling that, boosts me and encourages me. And I absolutely need that to be able to continue in my life. So this enmeshment really is indicative of a lack of sense of self. So the work in beginning to heal this kind of inadequacy is about establishing good boundaries, obviously, but also a good sense of self, so that the person understands what they feel. It really is the case that there are people who struggle in life because they don't know what they feel unless somebody else tells them. They don't know what their mind is because they haven't been in a position to really develop their thinking adequately so that they know what they believe. I think that this should instruct us well in terms of how we work with children, how we encourage young people to become critical thinkers and to be able to see themselves in relation to the world, to the society at large, and to their local friends and to the culture that they are a part of. Let's just carry on with the list here. Number 4, I guess, speaks for itself, but this is something that I think is really important to concentrate on for a minute. It's the fact that emotionally dependent relationships require exclusivity. And you'll see this when somebody is becoming emotionally dependent. It leads to jealousy. It leads to the best friend scenario. One or other, or both alternatively, can become very threatened when their friend makes other friends. In a normal, healthy friendship, we're excited when our friends connect with new friends that we meet. We're not cagey about passing on details or facilitating connection. And we're, gratified and encouraged when we see our friends helped and encouraged by other people. But in an emotionally dependent relationship, it becomes very threatening if somebody else comes into the equation. It feels very threatening because the person's sense of self is threatened, because they don't feel themselves well enough. They're not established enough in terms of their own sense of being and personality. And that's the essential issue. Let's just go back to the list. The relationship becomes ambivalent. It, you know, it you feel one thing one minute, another thing another minute. It becomes about manipulation. When there's a problem, one or other will detach and move away, and the moving away becomes something that is, an attempt to actually pull the person in the same direction. So it becomes highly manipulative. And the problem is it becomes very unhappy, actually, for both partners, because the one feels locked in and enmeshed, and the other feels so threatened that they don't know what to do with it. Michael, very good to see you. Thank you for dropping by today. I really agree with you that this is a horrible emotional trap. Thanks for sharing. And I appreciate what you're saying. Another man who knows something about emotional dependency. I want to say it again. Buy the book. If you are a male, get yourself a cover if you have to when you're on the train reading the book, when we all get set free. But get the book. It's the best. It's the seminal kind of a document that I think you need if you're going to be dealing with this issue. Let's carry on. I think I've already covered number 6. The relationship leads to jealousy and possessiveness because it's about exclusivity, and because those involved and experiencing this just don't have the confidence in themselves to be able to let somebody go. I've noticed also that these relationships can be very dramatic, very, very tearful, very, very sad, and therefore the highs and the lows are so extreme that it's clear to everybody around it, that around such a relationship, that this is going to have difficulty staying on track. Now, I'm pointing out the characteristics of emotional dependency. We haven't started speaking about how we support people and encourage people and be there for them when they're going through this, to encourage them to go in a different direction. So number 7, the relationship very often is dramatic. But number 8, I find very interesting as well. Again, I'm quoting here from Janelle Hellman's book, The Heart of Female Same-Sex Attraction. The relationship is resistant to breakups. Now, this is the interesting thing. There'll be a time when one or both of the partners recognizes that this is very unhealthy, and yet breaking up is just about impossible to do. They cannot conceive of ending the relationship. It's just like there's a brick wall or there's a cliff edge. And actually, that's where you and I can come in supporting people in that position. And it's a really important ministry, I would say, in the church, to be there for people who have become entangled in this way. And then finally, such relationships are a part of an endless cycle. In other words, if it happens once, it's probably happened before, and unless the roots are dealt with, I'm afraid it's likely to happen again. You know, I want to say this. It's very easy to say, well, this is just, spiritual idolatry. But the fact is, by degrees, people get involved in these relationships. They were just going on in their life, and then somebody appeared in their life that brought great joy and encouragement. And it's almost as though there's a slow but sure surrendering of themselves to this person. So they not only are without, a centered sense of their own self and being, but they give away what they have. And you'll see it in terms of the gifts they give or the sacrifices that they offer or the determination to protect the person that they're in such a relationship with. And very often what you see is this goes on for months and sometimes years. And then there's a break because so much has been given. Maybe a huge amount of money has been paid. The person has tried by all means to keep this relationship going, and it's not working. And then there's an explosion, and then it'll go in one of two ways. Either people start to look for help and find help, or they begin another cycle. They meet somebody else and they go in that direction. And again, I want to stress it's not necessarily a sexual thing, although it may well and often does lead to that. It's more an unhealthy relationship that is being developed. Okay, so I'm going to have a quick look here. Kylie is saying this is basically describing my previous lesbian relationships. It's difficult to see it when you're in it, I would say. Men who seek the ideal knight in shining armor, I would say that this is very much at the root of it. They long to be cared for, to feel a sense of belonging. Folks, I'm hoping that in describing things in this way, you are making connections with the two previous episodes where we have looked quite closely at attachment theory, and we've also spoken about attachment hunger. This kind of residual thing within us that is insatiable, that needs connection and complementarity with somebody else, and is motivated to find that in special relationships. And what I'm saying is, why is all of this happening? Well, it's because of the lack of a secure attachment position. That's what Janelle was saying here. It's about people being, let me just read it again. Many women with SSA are not able to exert healthy adult mutuality and reliance. They remain subject to the simultaneous pressures and influences of their unresolved attachment and dependency needs and differentiation process. As one might imagine, these two factors, a need to attach and the seemingly opposing need to separate and differentiate, create incredible irrational confusions and chaos, not to mention deep inherited relational instability. So now, for some reason, I didn't load it up and I don't want to take the time to do it now. But you remember in episodes 1, 2, and 3, I referred to the cycle of codependence between young children and their mother. And it goes on towards developing counterdependence where children separate slowly but surely. Now, to try and express this with the care that I think it needs is quite difficult. I meant to upload another diagram and didn't do it, but I'll just try and explain it, because I think the differentiation process towards codependence or from codependence into counterdependence and then to independence and ultimately the goal of interdependence is different for little boys and little girls. If you think of it, it's like both sons and daughters ideally are attached to their mother. It's like the mother is a home. And this is another thing I love about Janelle Hellman's book. She talks about all of this in the concept, in terms of the concept of homing. So the mother is like a home, attached to both the son and to the daughter. But the differentiation process, when the children begin to develop further, is different for boys and girls. And she makes the point that little boys move. They move towards their father. Their father is pulling them up to another level. Little girls, ideally, I guess, remain attached to their mother. And it's like their mother, that the mother and the daughter grow together in this construct. And the father moves in that world to support that young girl's development. And what I'm suggesting is, if that doesn't happen, if there is a problem in the relationship between the mother and the daughter, I think that this can have an impact. Well, obviously it has an impact on a young woman's development. So you often see it where a mother has been abused by a husband, where a wife has been pushed down and has no way of asserting herself and living a normal, healthy relationship with her husband, I beg your pardon. You'll see different reactions in the daughter. The daughter might over-identify with the father. That's one scenario. Or the daughter may be so protective of the mother, but so determined not to take on the same kind of role as the mother has. So she becomes in herself quite over-assertive. And it's really a reaction that is saying, the last thing I want to do is be like my mother, who is being abused by these men. Now, I'm sure there's much more work that needs to be done in looking at the differentiation process. But I would argue that this is the root of when things go wrong that have a huge impact on how we are later on in life and how we attach. And if it hasn't worked, if we haven't gone through an appropriate differentiation between ourselves and our mothers and develop the kind of relationship with our fathers that we need to, or at least, a near role model that would be masculine in the place of a father, we are going to have problems in life. That's the theory, and I think that's what you find very definitely in Janelle Hellman's book. Let me have a quick look here and see what's going on. I'm really glad that Rebecca is picking up the fact that this is not same-sex attraction issues necessarily. It can be, but it's something that anybody can experience. And indeed, I've seen that in the counseling room. It's not that it's all, a prerequisite of being same-sex attracted, not at all. So thanks again for pointing it out. And Min, I agree with you. When you're in it, it's really difficult to see the signs. It's back to the train in the tunnel. You get into the tunnel and you can see a light and you think, hallelujah, there's light in the tunnel, and you go towards the tunnel or towards the light in the tunnel. But then you realize that this is not only a light, this is a train hurtling down towards me, and I'm going to get hurt. And, there's something that you and I can do in our friendships and in our working relationships with people to gently help them and support them when that's happening. We really have to be very sensitive. This is not something that we can do very easily. So I want now to turn the attention away from what emotional dependency looks like and turn towards what can be done about it. And friends, if there's anyone here today who's feeling grim and discouraged and beaten up because of the complexity of some of the relationships that you've had, well, join the club. I understand, I believe, the pain that you're going through. And those of you who don't get this at all, I want to tell you, and I think I'm hoping some of those who are watching us will agree with this. They will know about the pain. In fact, I don't think it's extreme to say is that if you don't watch this, if you don't take care of it, it can lead to serious depression, to a great deal of self-harming, and to substance abuse to an extent that you just didn't think was possible for yourself. So if you're experiencing it, that's the time to get professional help, to reach out to somebody who can be with you in the pain. Preferably a professional counselor or psychotherapist. Look for somebody who you can trust, who's a salient person for you, who you can work with. But if that's not a possibility, then look for people in church. Look for somebody in the authority structure of a church who can objectively be there for you, not for every waking moment of the day, but where you can sometimes go to for accountability, for reassurance. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to now begin to deal with what we do about it. So we'll talk for the remainder of the time before we we look at some of the comments here or questions if they are there. Let's talk about the path out of dependency. And number one, it's about making a commitment to honesty. I'll never forget the day that I picked up Laurie Renzel's little book. So here's the difference. If you're a reader, this is the book for you by Janelle Hellman. If reading is not your thing, but you want the facts simply and quickly, then Laurie Renzel's old-fashioned but classic booklet is for you. This is about £12, Janelle's book, and this is probably £2 or £3. That's the difference between the two. So begin by making a commitment to honesty. When I picked up Laurie's book and read it, this little booklet, I have to say it was very painful because I realized that what I thought was, sincere and almost reverential love was not that. And for Christian viewers, it certainly wasn't 1 Corinthians 13. It was about emotional neediness on my part. And when I realized that, it was really painful because I knew I had to do something about it. But less of me. Let's go on and have a look at this. Can you believe it? I lost it again. There it is. Number 2, be honest with another person. And I can't stress this enough. If you're in this position, you really need to find somebody who can stand with you, who you can be honest with. The problem is when you're honest with that person, it won't feel the same as it did when you were with the person who was nurturing you, the person on whose every word you hung, because you were so desperate for affirmation and attention. But this person serves another person, another purpose, because they can be a lot more objective and they can ground you in the process of understanding where your emotions perhaps have been pretty extreme. I'm going to have to hurry up here, folks. Sorry, I'm going far too slowly. I think it is valid to allow God to work, or for you to realize, to recognize, make it a concerted effort on your part to allow God to work. What do I mean by that? Well, if you've entrusted this to God, don't be surprised if he takes you at his word and he shows you the roots. He may bring other people into your lives, books, resources, situations that teach you who you need to be. You know, what I remember in my life was I began increasingly to get more and more challenging jobs. I always felt these shoes were too big for me. I always felt like I was far too small in terms of what the job role required of me. Now I feel, by the grace of God, I was pushed more and more and more in an attempt to get me to try and achieve something bigger and greater than I thought that I was capable of. And that's why I'm a Christian. That's why I want to serve God, because he has my best interests. And friend, if you've been pained because of this, know this, that God is there to help you out. He wants to support you and help you to find the very essence of yourself. Number 4, I can relate to this. You have to prepare for grief and depression. And I'm sorry to have to say, it takes a long time. If you've been in a truly emotionally dependent relationship, it's going to take a while for you to get out of it. Number 5 speaks for itself, I think, and stands to reason. It's very important to cultivate other friends. And you know, they'll have a certain lack of luster to them. They'll feel not so excited, not so exciting. They won't give you the charge. They won't give you the excitement. But you see, we've been on a high if that kind of relationship is, you know, is what we think is the norm. We have to realize that we are investing too much in that and requiring the other person to do too much for us. And so that's why it's important. Remember, we spoke in one of the other sessions about, you know, at least 5 friends, somebody older, somebody younger, somebody the same age, somebody who's good at something you're not at, somebody who you're helping to do something with. Different relationships are going to help to safeguard you from these issues. Number 6, discover God's vision for friendships. I think that's a worthy thing to do. Spend time in his word. Spend time at church listening to what people are saying about healthy friendships. And then, of course, number 7, as I think I've already implied, it's really important to look at the deeper issues, the attachment issues. If you don't buy what I'm saying about attachment, well, these things just don't happen. There's cause and effect. There are issues within us that can be accessed. And if you find the right people to do it with, that can be something very helpful to you. If you're not open to that, but you do have a relationship with the Lord and you are open to him helping you then ask him to teach you and to show you the issues and ask him how you should proceed. But I have to say, isolation is your enemy. It's better to work in a community and to reach out to somebody who at least has your interests at heart and is concerned for you to achieve the very best in your life. Finally, I would be wrong to not say this. Be prepared for the long haul. Okay? It's just like anything else. All of us have weaknesses. It's really important to recognize that if this is a pattern in our lives, it's going to take a while to unpick. Frankly, if it's taken you, 20 years to get to this point in your pattern, it might take 5 or 6 or 10 years to unpick the pattern and to work it out. But that's why we get to walk with our friends, and if you're a Christian, with the Lord Jesus, because he can help us to do exactly that. So here are the 8 points. Well, folks, thank you, Matthew. You're telling us that you found that at times of your deepest grief, the Holy Spirit would interrupt with supernatural joy that does not make sense to your mind. He truly turns our mourning into joy. The Lord will not allow us to be stuck in depression. He lifts up our gaze and fills us with his comfort. Karis, it's really good to see you here today. Thank you for coming. Ferguson, lovely to have you. Have to admit, folks, I really struggle to interact with the comments here, but I'll do my best as we draw this to a close to work through the comments that I see there and to continue our discussion. So we're almost out of time here, folks. The one thing I did want to do, if I can find it, yes, is to look at where we are in the episodes in terms of the 10 things that we're trying to do over the next few weeks. We've looked at a counseling plan. It's not the counseling plan. It was just intended to be a kind of sample approach. We looked at Cohen's particular perspective that I think is helpful and good enough, but there'll be others. We've gone into the concept of attachment hunger, and I think that, again, we've touched on that today. And we've looked at addictions and patterning. Remember, what we're arguing is that, as far as I'm concerned, this idea of orientation as fixed and unchangeable is a problem. Patterning helps us to see that we can unpick the patterns, we can make new connections, we can go in new directions. We're not dependents, or we're not victims, is what I mean. We have choices. Even though we didn't choose things, we have choices around them. You didn't choose your emotional dependency patterning in your life. It just happened. You didn't know what is behind it. But you see, once you recognize it, just like when I picked up my book by Laurie Rensel and realized what was happening in my life, I had choices. You have choices, folks. We all have choices. We're not victims. Even if you didn't choose things, even if things have happened to you, even if people have violated you, we can choose to find help and go in another direction. I know there are some things we can't change, and there's all sorts of debate around that. But I have to say, we can change so it's good enough so that we can function in a healthy way. Let's just finish with looking at where we're going from here. Next week, I wanted to talk about assertiveness, because this, again, is central to people who are wanting to deal with same-sex attraction. If you are in the assertive state, I can almost promise you that you won't be in the passive state that is looking for, connection in a homosexual way. It just doesn't go together. Now, if that doesn't make sense to you or you disagree with it, we'll come back next week and I'll do my best to explain where I'm coming from. We're going towards cross-cultural competence. Whatever does that have to do with helping those of us who are moving away from unwanted same-sex attractions? Well, it really does have something, and I'll show you what it is. I'm going to be talking about the ancestor syndrome, the fact that we're all connected in one way or another. We're all sensitive to other people around us, whether or not we're close to them. Their lives impact on our lives. We all have a history. We all have a heritage. There are connections that affect us even if we don't know consciously what they are. I think that can be a very useful thing to look at. We're going to look at the replacement child. That's a more specialized area, but it has a bearing. I want to spend some time on trauma with a big T and a small t. And then finally, we'll look at refining what we're saying about working through all of this to help ourselves to become healthier individuals. So, folks, thank you so much for all that, your attention to this program. Rebecca, I hear you. It can be truly overwhelming in your circumstances. Reach out, dear sister. Connect with people around you. Don't be afraid to tell people what your need is. One thing I've learned, when we have expectations that people should know how I feel, it's going to end in disaster. What we have to do is say, this is my need. Can you help me? And if they say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, but this person can help you, that needs to be a good thing for you. Don't expect other people to see your pain. You'll have to get to the point where you explain it. And sometimes when we try and hope that somebody's going to see it, well, it just doesn't happen, and it becomes more discouraging and more depressing. Well, that's it, folks. I want to end at that point. I'm going to pray, and then we go on with our day. Thank you for coming, all of you. God bless you. Father in heaven, we bring ourselves to you today. Without you, we can do nothing. We look up to you, and we thank you for your presence in our lives. We pray that you would help us to live our lives in a responsible way. And we'll give you the praise and the glory. We thank you for what you've done in our lives, but we look forward to what you will yet do. God bless you, everybody. Thank you for coming, and hope to see you again next week. Goodbye.